Ural Mountains, Soviet Russia. A search party climbs through knee-deep snow toward a campsite that should have been abandoned weeks ago. They find the tent, collapsed, half buried in snow, sliced open, from the inside, by a knife. The hikers' belongings are still inside. Their boots, their coats, their food, everything they needed to survive in temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius. The hikers themselves, gone. The search party follows a trail of footprints leading away from the tent, downhill, into the darkness of the forest below. Some of the footprints show bare feet. Some show socks. Some show one boot. Nobody runs into a -40-degree night without their shoes. Nobody does that unless something inside that tent was worse than the cold outside. Over the next 3 months, all 9 bodies are found, scattered across the snow and frozen ravines below. 5 dead from hypothermia, 3 dead from internal injuries so severe a forensic examiner said they were comparable to being hit by a car, but with no external wounds. 1 woman missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips. Clothing tested, radioactive. The Soviet investigation lasted 3 months and concluded with 4 words that explained nothing. A compelling natural force. The files were classified. The area was closed to hikers for 3 years. And the 9 dead were buried with no answers. 65 years later, we still don't fully know what happened on that mountain. Before we get into the mystery, you need to know who these 9 people were. Because they were not amateurs. They were not careless. They were some of the most experienced young hikers in the Soviet Union. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, today known as Yekaterinburg. Igor was brilliant, meticulous, and passionate about mountaineering. He had designed special equipment for this very expedition, including a customized tent and ski bindings. The other 8 members, Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22. Cheerful, energetic, one of the most experienced female hikers in Thegrup. Rustam Slobodin, 23. Engineer, physically exceptional, known for his endurance. Yuri Doroshenko, 21. Strong, athletic, close friend of Igor's. Yuri Krivonishenko, 23. Engineer who worked at a nuclear facility called Chelyabinsk 40. This detail becomes important later. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, 23. Engineering graduate, son of a man who had been arrested during Stalin's purges. Alexander Kolevatov, 24. The oldest student in the group. Studious, reserved. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20. The youngest, passionate hiker, had already completed multiple Grade 2 expeditions. And finally, Semyon Zolotriov, 37. A last-minute addition to the group. A sports instructor, significantly older than the others, who had specifically requested to join this particular expedition. His presence, and his past, would later become one of the most debated elements of the entire case. There was a 10th member, Yuri Yudin, who turned back on January 28 due to knee and joint pain. He was the only one who came home. He spent the rest of his life haunted by survivor's guilt and obsessed with finding out what happened to his friends. He died in 2013, without ever knowing the truth. These were real people. Young people, with diaries and inside jokes and a little newspaper they made for themselves on the trek, titled, The Evening Autoton. One headline read, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist." They were joking, probably about themselves. 4 days later, they were dead. On January 23, 1959, the group left Sverdlovsk by train. The goal, to reach the summit of Gora Ototon, a mountain in the northern Ural range. The route was classified as Category 3, the highest difficulty level available in the Soviet Union at the time. It required traversing 300 kilometers in harsh winter conditions. The plan was straightforward. Trek for approximately 16 days. Reach Oterton. Return to the village of Vishay. Send a telegram confirming their safe return by February 12. February 12 came. No telegram. The sports club waited a few more days. Delays were common in these expeditions. But by February 20, with still no word, a search and rescue operation was launched. They sent students first, then the military, then police. On February 26, they found the tent. The tent had been pitched on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakachel, a mountain whose name, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, translates to Dead Mountain. The search party found it collapsed, partially buried under snow, and cut open, not from the outside, but from the inside. Multiple cuts, made by a knife, as if someone, or multiple people, had slashed their way out in a desperate hurry. Inside the tent, everything the 9 hikers needed to survive was still there. Food, warm clothing, boots, a flask of alcohol, cameras, personal diaries, Igor Dyalov's own engineering notebook. Nobody leaves their boots behind in -40-degree weather unless they have no choice. Nobody abandons food and warm clothing unless staying inside the tent is more terrifying than going outside without them. Whatever they saw, or heard, or felt, inside that tent on the night of February 1, 1959, it drove 9 experienced mountaineers out into a killing cold with almost nothing on their feet. The footprints led downhill toward the tree line, about a mile away. 8 or 9 sets of tracks, some bare feet, some socks, some single boots. Calm, measured steps, not running, walking. That detail is chilling. They were not panicking. They were walking, deliberately, away from the tent, which means whatever drove them out, they believed the direction they were walking was safe. The tent was the danger, not the cold. The search party followed the footprints to a large cedar tree at the forest's edge. Here they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both 21 and 23 years old, lying near the remains of a small fire. Both were nearly naked. Branches had been broken from the cedar tree up to 5 meters high, as if someone had been climbing it, desperately. Krivonishenko had bitten off a piece of his own knuckle. He also had 3rd-degree burns on his hands and legs, but he was alive when he received those burns, because you cannot sustain 3rd-degree burns if you are already dead or unconscious. He burned himself trying to stay warm, and still froze to death. Moving back toward the tent, between the cedar and the campsite, 3 more bodies were found over the following days. Igor Dyatlov himself, 300 meters from the cedar, face up in the snow, hands clenched in front of his chest. He appeared to have been trying to return to the tent when he died. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 630 meters from the cedar, also appeared to be crawling back toward the tent. Rustam Slobodin, found between them. He had a fracture in his skull, but medical examiners initially still listed hypothermia as cause of death. A fractured skull with no external wound. From what? All 5, cause of death listed as hypothermia, then the search stopped. The remaining 4 were buried under meters of snow. May 1959. The snow begins to melt. A Mansi hunter and his dog follow a trail of cut branches, and discover a snow den, buried in a ravine 75 meters from the cedar tree. Inside, the final 4, Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old. Semyon Zolotriov, 37. Nikolai Thibaut Brignol, 23. Alexander Kolevatov, 24. And here, the injuries become impossible to explain away. Thibaut Brignol had a massive skull fracture, the kind caused by extreme blunt force impact. Zolotriov and Dubinina both had multiple broken ribs, bilateral fractures to the chest, on both sides of the body simultaneously. The forensic examiner described the force required as comparable to being hit by a car, but, and this is crucial, there were no external wounds. No bruising on the skin. No lacerations. No marks that would correspond to a physical blow from outside. Whatever crushed their chests, did it from inside. Or with a force so uniform, so simultaneous, that it left no surface marks. And then, Lyudmila Dubinina. Her tongue was missing. Her eyes were missing. Part of her lips were gone. The official explanation: she fell face down into a small stream in the ravine, and decomposition combined with the running water and possible animal scavenging removed the soft tissue. Some researchers accept this. Others point out that the level of decomposition in her case was dramatically higher than the other bodies found at the same time, despite the freezing temperatures that should have preserved everyone equally, and the clothing of several hikers, when tested with a Geiger counter, showed elevated levels of radiation. The Soviet investigators noted the radiation, and then closed the case anyway.